Well, tonight we have Chris Lucas from Bee Barons in Newark. He has spoken to us a couple times before, a very popular speaker with our club. We really like to hear him, what he has to say. He's had a lot of success with survival and multiplying his bees. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Chris, and say go for it.
Okay, let's see if we can adjust this thing out of my way a little bit. Okay, I'm assuming everybody's on. I can't tell how many people are on, no clue.
26 right now, and I'm sure
Okay,
we'll
so we
have
got
people coming.
quite a bit. All right, everybody can hear me. So,
Oh, Chris, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second.
Go ahead.
I want to ask permission. Could we record this and post it on a private email channel or YouTube channel for a bit for people that couldn't get here tonight?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much. We have people that have really appreciated the Zoom meetings because we can record, and oftentimes they work too late or they can't get, to the meeting. So it's been very beneficial for them. So, okay. Thank you very much. All right, go for it.
Okay, so obviously it's March here, so everything I'm going to talk about, we're gonna backtrack a little bit to about late January, and we're really going to focus on January, February, March, and a little bit into April. So, and really, what I'm going to share with you is how we manage our operation. So, we'll go ahead and get started. And why can't I control the slides?
Oh, you did just a minute ago. Can you
What the heck happened?
Can you use left and right on your keyboard?
Hold on here. Left and right.
You know, the arrows, the arrow keys.
No. What happened? Huh. Hold on. Technical difficulties.
Yeah, call your kid. There. Oh, there you
down.
go.
See that?
Oh, okay. There we go.
Okay. All right. So obviously, I own and run Bee Barons. So we've got 10 plus years. We're probably closer to the 14, 15 mark. So we run in Licking, Muskingum, and Coshocton counties. That's about where we keep everything. We're considered what you call sideline beekeepers. We push almost 250 colonies now. So we're starting to build pretty heavy now. A lot of what we talk about tonight is really going to be driven on how I manage our business and what we do. So our management strategy, so everybody understands, is we're driven to produce honey. It is a large portion of our income, and so we manage these hives to produce honey versus somebody who might manage to raise queens, somebody who might manage to sell nukes type of thing. So our main thing here is we're out to produce honey. We sustain our operation. We have a grafting portion that we do, obviously, and through splits. So that's how we sustain our own operation. We're probably about 80% in making and supplying our own queens. I do buy some from what I would consider reputable people, and it's really a time thing on my part because of, again, driving to the honey side, and that's where our focus is. We sell bees, obviously, and really what that is that's some of our overstock, if you want to call it that. But I'm set up and I try to maintain. I'm running by myself, so I don't want to get out of control. And we've learned over the years, it's not about quantity of hives, it's really about quality and how healthy you keep these hives. So when I say we sell overstock, I try to stay right around 250. So if we've got extra splits and stuff, absolutely we sell those. Obviously honey, we do sell equipment and stuff, and really we support a lot of questions and try to help and guide people along. So some general thoughts. So what I'm going to share today, my goal is to tell you what we do in hopes that you can be successful. So it doesn't matter what level you're at, whether you're at a single colony, you're at 10 colonies, you're a hobby. So it's really apply what you can from this and see where it takes you. I always say you cannot learn what works until you learn what doesn't work. We're always going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect by any means. So you'll learn from that. You got to be patient, ask a lot of questions. And we really strive to be proactive versus reactive. And you'll kind of see a lot of that in building here. We don't like to walk into a bee yard and into the unknown and say, we're going to check colonies and we're just going to kind of go along and work with what we got. So a lot of stuff is really planned out. And we really try to be proactive from that approach. So again, this is what we do. You may do things different, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. The things that I share here, it is not every last thing that we do. I tried to focus on some of the bigger strategies that we use. We do some other little things, but again, we're limited on time. So I've got to try to weed out some of the smaller things. And all the dates in here, I'm just really trying to give you an idea of when things typically occur. If you're taking notes or anything like that, and I happen to say, you know, the last week of January or something, that's not written in stone. We manage by what we observe in these colonies and really how Mother Nature behaves. So again, I'm just trying to give you a general idea of when these things typically occur. So getting started here, we really focus on three things pretty heavily. So we try to monitor the diseases of the colony. So the big one is mite control, obviously, the varroa destructor. And we're looking for other issues with diseases. I mean, you have small hive beetles, European foul brood, those type of things. But the big one is mite control. And if you can keep your mites under control and manage them well, it really takes care of a lot of things. The next big thing, and these are all in the order, so this is by priority of what we do. So the second one is nutrition. So we obviously the feed, what we're feeding them, and the protein that we're giving them, and trying to keep these colonies as healthy as we can. Then obviously the queen stock. So we kind of gauge, and we're noting things that are going on through the year and what we see. Obviously, we're watching the mite tolerance and how the control is going in there. But so everybody knows, we requeen half of our operation 1 year and then the other half the second year. So that's what we do there. All right, so if we back up a little bit, we're going to back up into late January. I often hear people, say they shut their bees down and they don't get in them until certain times of the year, and that's fine. I can tell you this picture was taken in late January, so when we had all that weather, and you see we're out in all that weather, monitoring what's going on type of thing. So really the first winter checks we target for late January. So we've winterized and we've closed these boxes up, and everything is set, and we try to be done with that by about Thanksgiving, and we won't go back until this time. So we're targeting the late last week of January here. So when we crack these lids, and again, we're not pulling frames and doing all that, we're just a slight crack of the lid to see what's going on in there. So the first thing we're going to look at is, where is that cluster in relation to the honey stores? It needs to be on it. So you can check your weight by lifting each side of the box, and you can tell by how heavy each side of the box where the majority of the honey is at. And then you can simply look and say, where's the cluster? Is it close by? Is it on top of it? Is really what you want. So that's the honey stores that we're looking at. At this time, you got to think about, if you need emergency feeding, what are your options? So you have sugar cakes, candy boards, fondant. There's a repertoire of things out there that you can use. Obviously, the goal is not emergency feeding, but if you need to take that, we prepare for that.
And anybody else here, Chris?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I can too.
Yeah, I
You're
can.
good.
Can you guys hear him? Maybe it was
Me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Good? You good? So you don't go in here looking to emergency feed. Obviously, you want to have enough honey on and to get these bees through the winter. But we prepare for that potential of emergency when we overwinter these colonies. And one of these pictures in these slideshows, when we get to it, I'll show you how we put a shim on this colony. So in the event, we can react immediately when we're out there. And so basically we're doing these things, and the next check we're planning for is roughly 3 weeks away. So if they need some type of feed, it's going on, we're going to put it on a little heavy because we don't plan to come back for about 3 weeks. So now we move into mid-February. So again, we're going to make sure the honey stores versus the cluster location is what we want to see. And at this time, we take the first assessment of the colony size. So we count the number of frames of bees. Now, I'll caution you because you can open that lid and crack it and look, and you might see, let's say, 3 frames of bees, and you're going, oh my colony's only 3 frames of bees. Really, we crack the boxes loose and tip them because oftentimes those bees will also be down low, and you'll realize that that colony is much bigger than you think it is. So that's how we get a true count of bees, by counting from the underside. Any abnormalities, so we're looking for any crazy anomalies or anything we see going on that might be worthy of a note. And this is log, so we have a log book, and this is one of the very few times of the year that we really take super good notes on what's going on in these colonies. The rest, once we get into the nectar flow, we start writing on the top covers of what's going on with how we do things. And we're going to go ahead and start protein. Okay, that's often what we call pollen patty. Okay, it's really a protein supplement that we're going to give these bees. You got to remember, we're building for a honey production. So my goal here is to build this brood nest ahead of Mother Nature. So once we start feeding, I recommend you don't stop, because if you start and these colonies start building brood nests and you stop, you now starve the brood nest, and then you'll get into unhealthy issues. They can't feed that brood, and it creates trouble. So in that picture you see there's a big old 50-pound brick of fondant. So if we need that, that's there. You see the protein patties. Now I tell you, on a large colony, we cut those in half. Something that's a little smaller, we'll quarter them. You want to be careful about putting too much of that on. If you do get a warm day, it'll get a little runny, and then it tends to attract the small hive beetles and stuff. So you really want them to eat it. It's not like something that's staying in that colony for weeks on end. So we don't throw that entire full patty on all the time. Really, it'd have to be a monster colony for something like that to occur. So now we're moving into mid-March. Okay, so we're continuing to monitor the honey stores and the protein supplements. This is a colony from overwinter this year. This is very normal from what we see. So something like this, counting the frames, we're going to be right around that 8 to 9 mark, just looking up top. But I can tell you, cracking this box loose, they're also down underneath a bit. And also in this picture, I don't know, can you see my mouse?
Yep.
Okay, see this right here? This is a wood shim that we put on top of our boxes when we overwinter them. And you see we've got a hole here drilled for ventilation. So in the event that we need to add feed, the space is created, we slice off a slice of that fondant, and we'll lay it on top of these bees. We'll apply a little smoke to run them down just slightly, and then just gently lay that fondant on top of that cluster. So in the event we're running short, that's how we feed them. At this time, we take a second assessment of the colony, the size of it. So it may be the same. You might see a slight increase at this point, but what we should not see is it should not be less than the first one, the first assessment we did. So then this covers any abnormality, or we also look for any abnormalities we would see if anything's picked up or changed, or did we note something last time? Do we still see the same thing going on? Again, all that is logged in our log book so we understand what's going on. So now we move into early April. So I'll call this around that first week of Easter. Again, we're looking at the honey stores, make sure things are well. and then what the protein supplement is doing. On the honey stores, you'll find that when we start getting into March into April, they're going to consume almost what they consume from, let's say, November up until this point. They're going to consume a large majority of that while they're brooding up and this weather's starting to change. And especially with us feeding them protein, that's also forcing this to move along quicker. We take the third assessment of the colony. Okay, at this point, we expect to see an increase in the number of bees we've got running at this point because we've been feeding them and boosting them ahead of Mother Nature. At this point, all colonies are now tagged by number and we color code them. And I'll explain why we do that here in a minute. If the weather is on our side, we will also pull our baseline mite checks. So that's why I put potential in early April. So let's look at our assessment analysis before we go farther. So how we code things. So anything with a green tag is something that's greater than 8 frames. I'm going to classify that as strong. Okay, this is easy to deal with in the springtime when we start talking about splits here shortly. Then we have yellow. This is 4 to 7 frames. We classify that as medium. There's 3 stars there. That just reminds me, this is the hardest thing to deal with in understanding how to prepare that colony for springtime. Because in our business, we don't want to swarm. And then red is anything less than 4 frames. So these might be your little 2 frames, 3 frames, ones that just squeak through winter. We classify those as weak. And what we'll ultimately do is we'll call those from the bee yard. When I say call, they're going to the nursery yard. So we'll explain that here shortly. So now with this assessment all logged, we now have a plan for every colony at the bee yard. So we come back to the shop, we sit down, we review all 3 assessments when making decisions. So I would caution you when you're looking at the size of your bees, if you're not keeping some log of like we do, you can keep whatever you want, but some colonies are going to overwinter on a lot of bees. Some of them will overwinter on 2-3 frames of bees and then they just absolutely explode. So for somebody to look at a 2-frame colony and say, man, these are terrible, it's going to die, I'm failing. And if you're not keeping an eye on this, that thing has the potential to explode, and that might be the genetic of that colony. So that's why we review all 3 assessments, because we should see that colony that was maybe 2 or 3 frames at the first assessment growing rapidly by this point. So at this point, we're going to say we're going to split, equalize, we might reverse boxes, or we're going to cull them to the nursery yard. So it's all mapped out. There is a plan for every colony before we go back into the bee yard. We know what we're doing. We often hire some help, and it's very easy for me to communicate to our helpers, here's what we need to do with these colonies. They know what to do getting off the truck with split boxes, etc. So we also use this assessment to understand the amount of time we've put into these bees since late January into this April timeframe on how much time and money we have spent. Obviously, it's on protein. If we're feeding fondant, and that's what we do in the colder times of the year to build these populations, is this a wise investment? Is our money paying for what we expect to see versus throwing money out the door? So it helps us understand the budget side of it too. So now we move into mid to late April. So if we weren't able to get the baseline mite counts early April, they occur now. So at this point, we will take all our baseline counts, and I'll explain that here shortly, go into quite detail how we do that. But after we pull the baselines, we go back to our assessment, and I know what every colony needs, and this is where it gets split, equalized, reversed, or it's culled. when I say call, let me explain this. One of those weak colonies, we're going to pull it from the main production bee yards, and it's going on the truck, and it's going to what we call the nursery yard. Okay, we really strive to have things equalized and everything the same. So when we go into our production yards, our tasks are very standard, and we're doing the same things for the most part over and over. Colonies are getting boxed at the same amounts and rates. And I don't want a bee yard with, you know, let's say 15 great performing colonies, and I got 2 that are halfway performing. In my world, it creates problems. So when I say call, they're all going to the nursery yard. So I confine our weak colonies to the nursery yard, which is on a very large farm close to the house. So because that takes a lot of time to manage those nursery yards. So we'll discuss what's going on in that nursery yard in a little bit as well. So from this point forward, we're pretty much into checking colonies weekly, okay, until the nectar flow subsides, which here, where we're at, in Licking and Coshocton and Muskingum, it's typically around mid to late June. Now again, we're not going to wait for that last drop. Will the weather change slightly and extend it? It could. We'll adjust to that. Could it dry up real quick and the nectar flow stop? Absolutely. So we'll adjust to all that. But pretty much it's mid to late June when it occurs. So let's talk a little bit about the mite at a very high level. You can read a lot of stuff about mites, and there's some good stuff out there, but this is just some very basic understanding of what's going on with the varroa mite. So first off, it feeds off blood. I try to tell people, if you compare it to the human, it's kind of like a human dealing with a tick and a mosquito type of thing. So the mite moves from bee to feed to get to the brood. That's what they're ultimately trying to do. And when they're moving from bee to bee, they transfer any viruses they're carrying. So it's just like a tick or a mosquito with us. So they reproduce. It occurs when the cell is capped of the worker or the drone brood. So once the cell, obviously they hop down in there before the cell is capped, and then the cell is capped, and then that's when the reproduction of the mite occurs. So the drone brood, we all know, is more desirable. And the reason it's more desirable is because of the longer development time of the drone versus the worker. So the higher count of a mature female, it's more likely that she'll develop in a drone. And the reason is, in a worker brood, you got approximately 5 eggs on a worker brood. And when you get to the drone brood, I've read it's about 6. So the cell's capped. So the first mite egg that is laid is a non-fertilized egg. So it's a male, okay? So if the mite was mated properly, then she lays, the rest of her eggs she lays are female. If she was not mated properly, the rest of the eggs she lays are males. So when you kind of stack all that up, you have 10 days is needed for at least the first female. Remember, we start at the second egg to become a mature mite. So if you kind of back that up and look at the brood life, a worker brood emerges about 11 days after capping. So you've got basically 1 day there. So let's say it's going to emit 1 mature female. But when you look at a drone brood, it's 14 days after capping. So there are obviously 3 more days. So now you've got more female mites coming out of a drone brood. So now that's where the increase in population comes from when they come out of the brood there. Another good way, obviously the fecal matter, poop, whatever you want to call it, it's deposited on the side walls of the cell. So you'll see these little white type of dots thing on the side of the cell. So that's another indication that something's going on. So our mite regimen and the baseline we established. So first off, we look at our treatment time. So we check early spring, and we do that if it's needed. In the summer, so we target July 4th, and we use Apivar. In late fall, we will use oxalic acid when the colonies are broodless. So obviously we vaporize that. I think everybody's familiar with that product and that technique now. Our method is sampling. So basically we alcohol wash. And then obviously we have to pull a sample of bees, and the location matters. From all the research we've done and our learning, these mites are they're gonna be on all the bees per se from age, but they're most on the nurse bees because they're trying to get to that brood, and obviously the nurse bees are tending to the brood. So we make sure our samples are pulled from the nurse bees. So don't sample the queen. I hope we all know that. That'd be a tragic mistake. There's a couple ways to sample. Obviously, we pull a nice brood frame out. We look for the queen. If she's not there, it's pretty simple. We grab the sample. If you're kind of new to beekeeping, there's a few different techniques. One thing you can do is you can kind of have a Tupperware container. Let's say you find your frame of brood and you've looked it over and you're still leery that you haven't found the queen. You can shake that frame of brood over like a Tupperware container, have all the bees fall in it. This does a few things. It will spread the bees out so you can get a better look to A, make sure you don't have the queen, and B, the older bees will fly right back to the colony. So now you're really left with a very good sample of the nurse bees that are in this Tupperware container. And then you can kind of pick it up and you can tap it on a corner and they'll all fall into the corner, and then you can dump them in your sample cup. So if you're new, that might be an easy way to get acquainted with this process and doing that. So when we sample and we do our alcohol wash, we're looking for 1% or less. We sample a 200 count, so 2 mites. When we're in a bee yard, we're going to sample 25% of that bee yard. We do not sample 100%. I could never do it running what we run. What we don't consider a mite treatment. All these things out there, they help, but what we don't consider mite treatments are, I run a screen bottom board and all the mites fall to the bottom. That's not a treatment. We don't, I'll say, we're not too fond of, some people like to shake powdered sugar on bees and they'll cleat them off. We don't consider that a mite treatment. So it gives you kind of an idea. Absolutely doing nothing and saying that bees will take care of it, we absolutely don't consider that a mite treatment. So our treatments are Apivar, that's what we choose to use, and the oxalic acid method. There's other chemical treatments out there, and there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that that's what we choose to use. So baseline mite counts, what does it tell us? So it tells us where the colony started the year. So way back when we first started logging this, we can go back to those log books. How is the colony dealing with the mites over the year? So we can kind of see what's going on. We're sampling there in that April time frame, and then after we treat, well, we'll get to that in a minute. I don't want to jump ahead. And then we got the summer and the winter, so we can see how things are going. We take the average. So we talked about taking the 25% of the bee yard. So that establishes a baseline. And we record all that. And then what we do is we look at the average of all the yards for an average of the entire operation. How am I managing the entire operation together across 3 counties? And we kind of keep this divided so I can see if there's a difference in one county versus the other. It's just like nectar flow. I can tell you it's bizarre. I mean, you'll get certain nectar producers that will do very well in one county at certain times of the years, and we go to the next county below us and there's nothing, and then we'll immediately flip around when the next thing is blooming or something. So the same kind of thing works. And really what you're trying to say is, was the treatment regimen effective? You only know if when you treated, if it works if you took a sample after your treatment was done. Don't assume anything. I can't stress that. A lot of people, after they get by, I'm going to treat my bees, and they actually treat their bees. They will treat their bees and they say, I treated my bees, I'm done. And I can tell you that's a bad practice. Take a sample after the treatment is done so you know you were effective. So what if the colony remains above 1%? What do you do? Well, I'm going to tell you, you better act quick. Was the treatment protocol followed? So follow the manufacturer's instructions. A lot of them are temperature dependent. Some of them tell you to add certain amounts at certain times over certain periods. Follow all those instructions. Don't take shortcuts. Perhaps you might switch to a different product. You know, there's a lot of discussion about mite immunity over same product over and over. I believe probably over time that could occur. So switch up your product maybe. Ultimately, if we get into an issue where we've got a colony that's running above 1% and it's something that's reoccurring, we ultimately mark that colony as split and requeen. Okay, so we're going to break it down and we're going to requeen it and get it going. That would be something that we're going to take to the nursery yard. So split or equalize. So now we're kind of jumping back to the whole assessment thing. So we've got our assessment going. We know it's good, we know it's medium, and we know it's strong, we know it's medium, we know it's weak. Okay. So are we gonna split or equalize? So what we do is we look at these colonies, and again, my goal is not to swarm, but at the same time, I'm trying to maximize my honey production. It is a fine line. Okay. So what we've found is that we shoot for 5 to 6 frames of brood post-split. So what I mean there, from the parent colony. So let's just keep the math easy. Let's say we've got a 10-frame colony that's a nice strong colony, and we open it up and there's 8 frames of brood in it, okay? I'm gonna pull that down to 5 or 6 frames of brood, egg, larvae, cat brood, okay? And we're going to add a box, make sure they're good to go to try to set this colony up. Okay, my plan is to split one time in the spring. It costs me a lot of time to continually go back and split. So that's why we try to knock these down to that 5 or 6 mark. This is a good opportunity to draw frames. What we'll do is when we split a colony like that, we'll put a couple foundation frames right above that brood nest. So what that helps with is you get these excessive nectar flows from time to time. It gives a place for some of that nectar to go. It allows you to draw frames, so you always need to be drawing frames. So it kind of helps things, and it a little bit slows that colony down a little bit from getting away from you. So in the end, when we go to a bee yard, we're setting all these colonies to have that 5 to 6 frames of brood. So I'll call it extra for lack of a better word. So all the extra frames of brood and bees will go into what we set up 4-frame splits. And they will go to the nursery yard where the grafting has already taken place, and they'll receive a queen cell. And all this is timed out. I know my schedule from now until the first rounds of grafting come off. It's all set up. So I know when I'm splitting and when things need to be in the bee yard. I know every time I graft, I know when my grafts come off, so I can walk right through everything and what we're doing in every bee yard. Let's see here. So sometimes we reverse boxes. So the tough ones to deal with are your 4 to 7 frame ones. That's what we find. You're kind of on that borderline. So a strong one, 8 to 10, we call that easy to deal with. Bust that thing down. You literally almost cut it in half because it's going to run away from you. The weak ones we call easy to deal with. We're going to call them to the nursery yard. They're going because something is going on. Is it a queen thing? Who knows what? Until we get it to the nursery yard and we can look, something's going on. Most of the time, those are requeens. The queen's starting to fail. So we take out the queen, it gets a grafting cell, and away we go to start building that colony back up. So the tough ones are those middle ones. So, and I can't tell you black and white exactly what to do every time. It's kind of a game of look and see and observation. But sometimes we'll leave those on that 5 to 6 frame side and we'll just reverse them. Sometimes if we're down at that 4 frame mark, I can tell you we're going to equalize. So if we have a big 10 frame colony of brood, instead of making a split, I'm going to equalize that brood to, say, a 4 frame colony and bring it up to my wanting of a 5 to 6 frame brood colony. I want everything equal in that bee yard, as close and as best as I can possibly get it. So when we're coming back and checking bees and doing what we do, I'm doing the same thing to every one. I don't have the super performer, the mid performer, and the troublesome colonies, and I'm fumbling around doing things. So when I say reversing boxes, if anybody doesn't know, obviously the bottom, the box on the top goes to the bottom, and it's just reversed. And we typically do this coming out of winter because typically the bees will move up. They're following the honey, and most of them are up top for a good part of it. And you can just simply reverse them. It allows them to move up into any drawn comb that was down below them. Will they go down on their own? Absolutely. It's just something we do. So that's what reversing is. So call. So this is any colony less than 4 frames. I know in my operation, don't mess around with it. Okay. I would suggest don't mess around with it. It costs you so much time and everything. If you've got a failing queen coming out of winter and that colony from your assessment was hanging out at 2 frames for all those weeks, something is going on. Don't mess around with it. Try to do something. We suggest you requeen it. So we consolidate all our queen rearing, all our splits, all that go to one farmyard that we have. So all my time where I'm spending managing that, and it takes a lot of time, is in one yard. And what we'll do is when those colonies get back to health and they're growing up and they become to the point where you don't have to babysit them, we simply move them out to the production yard if there's a hole somewhere. So we look at what we're going to do for the week, and if there's any holes in any bee yards, the truck's loaded, and away we go. And when we get to those bee yards, they're dropped right in the hole. They're making honey. It's just like one of the other colonies that's already there. So that's what we mean by culling. So looking ahead. So if we look into May, so obviously we're monitoring them weekly by this time. The grafting that we do is continually to go around until we complete all of our splits. Looking into June and July, this is where the winter prep starts. We start prepping at this time. So this is where the summer mite treatment is going to occur, where we take Apivar, where we use the Apivar, and I'll say it again, we're going to sample after that treatment to make sure it was effective. You've got to keep those mite counts down low. If you've got a colony with a high mite count in summer, it ain't making it through the winter. Odds are it's going to go right around Thanksgiving, if not beforehand. We are going to feed heavy through the summer dearth. Okay. As soon as that honey comes off and we treat, the feeders go on and the sugar water goes on, and we will monitor what's going on in that colony with the frames. And if we have to continue to add protein, we will add protein. We want to keep those bees healthy all through summer. Ultimately, we're going to try to pull a fall crop off. But plus, you want that good, healthy colony, and it will take care of a lot of issues on its own. So summer feeding, so we call it the gas gauge. Obviously, you see these frames of brood. We're looking at the tops right in this area. This is the nectar dome we're looking at. So we're making sure these are nice and full as we're feeding. And you got a band in here that will be any pollen coming in. So we're kind of watching that. And then obviously you've got your cat brood. These are nice solid frames. This is what we expect to see out of a good, healthy colony. So that kind of wraps up and takes us to the heart of this time of the year, what we do looking forward. So I guess at this point, it's what questions do you have with what we do and how we do things and how you could relate it to what you've got going on in your operation, whether you're new, whether it's a single colony, whether you're running 10, 20, 30. What questions do you have?
Okay, everybody's going to need to unmute themselves. Lower left corner. I don't think I can do it from here. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions, please do so.
Hey, Chris, this is Bryce.
Hey.
I got a question. You were talking about equalizing and slashing down your greens down to 5 or 6. When do you target that 5 or 6 size going into the honey flow?
So I'm going to target it right there in mid to late April. And that's frames of brood. That's not frames of bees. You understand? I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
follow me?
Got it.
Yes, I got it.
I'm leaving behind 5 to 6 frames of brood, obviously covered in bees, but we're also leaving behind more bees, but I'm going to take away any extra frames of brood. I'm really trying to stop the swarm. And I encourage you, you gotta play the fine line, and you gotta walk it, and you gotta play the game. And you're gonna err on the side of caution, and you're gonna take too much, and you're gonna err on the other side, and you're gonna say, I better leave some behind, and they're gonna swarm. I always err a little bit towards that caution side, because if they swarm, my honey crop is gone anyway. If they're a little light and they take a little bit longer to build, I might miss the locust flow a little bit, but I'm going to pick up all the other flows where I totally miss them. So that's why I kind of err on that side of it.
Chris, if you
All right.
find that your hives build up again before, the end of the summer, do you ever split again or not?
Potentially we will, potentially. But again, we try to get to that point where we're splitting them early enough and big enough that we're going to avoid that at all costs. It's time and money, but if something's building, we're going to bust it down.
Now, are you running just one brood box then? Are you talking 2 brood boxes with 5 frames?
So when we set up, let's say we set up for the nectar flow at this mid to late April time. My brood, I'm going to obviously keep down low. The next box up I'm running is, let's just keep this easy and the super details out of it. I want to make sure that's a lot of where my drawn open comb is. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to super with 2 drawn supers. And what we tend to find, we do not run queen excluders when we're making honey. And what we tend to find when we bust these things and get them to that 5 to 6 frame brood baseline and allow them to build, we add the 2 supers. And if she wants the room, we let her run into that bottom medium. Okay.
Okay, so the second box you add is, you've got a deep on the bottom and
So
then a
I'm
medium.
deep. Yep. So let's start from the bottom, deep. Next box up is a deep. Next box is a medium.
Okay.
Next box is a medium when I super.
Yep.
Okay. So as that colony's growing, if she wants room, I'm going to let her tell me, and she's going to run up into that first medium. We let her go, and we let her lay in there.
Yeah.
And then we've come back a week later. Again, we're checking hives every week, and if I see that going on and I see that nectar building in that top medium, we're going to shuffle that medium up. We're going to add another medium up underneath there. So ultimately, it'll be 3 mediums on there. And what we find that happens is when you let her lay in that medium, when it's time to pull honey, that brood is hatched and out of there, and it's already backfilled with nectar. Now, is it 100% all the time? No. So what we'll do is if we go to pull honey, and let's say there's, again, let's keep this easy, 20 colonies in a bee yard, and I'm running 10 frame equipment, and there's 1 frame of brood left in every medium from where she laid, I simply take that and confine it to a couple brood boxes. It goes on a colony and it hatches out.
Mhm.
So ultimately, that's how we get them out of there.
So you really start your growing up season with just 5 frames in the bottom box and let it
5
go
to
from
6
there.
frames
5
of
to
brood.
6 of
Yep.
brood.
Yep.
Yeah.
You got to remember though, we're feeding with fondant starting in late January, and we've
Mhm.
added the protein by February. We are well ahead of let's call it the dandelion game.
Right.
If you don't, so if you're just a hobby beekeeper and you don't follow any of that, obviously I'm going to tell you, make sure the bees have feed. If you're coming out of winter and your bees starve, unfortunately, I'm going to blame that on the beekeeper, because you have actions you can take that you can learn from. So next year you don't get into that position. So we're feeding these bees and we're brooding them well ahead of the dandelion. If you're the hobby type person, the dandelion is what you're really relying on to build that population. So don't go busting these colonies down to 5 or 6 frames of brood if you're not following that feeding protocol. Again, we're in it for the honey business. I'm in it to build it, and I'm in it to make honey as fast as we can off the first available nectar flows. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Hey, this is Greg. Yeah, this is Greg. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got am I connected?
Yes, we hear
I
you.
see you. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Technology is not my thing here. I have a question because my farm is more south. I'm in Jackson, Ohio, which is down, in southern Ohio, and my place is mostly wooded. And the way these trees will pollen or bloom, there is almost there's pollen available in staggered forms all summer, and I have clover and pasture and stuff. How would your schedule change if you have a nectar? I would assume I would have a nectar flow for a long period of time in the in the spring and into the summer.
Well, from what, so you touched on a lot of things there. So let's first talk about the nectar flow. And we talked to some beekeepers up and down the state, and from our knowledge and the best of what we see in talking to these guys, there's about a 4 to 5 week difference from, let's say, the Ohio River to Lake Erie. So you're going to tend to be earlier on these nectar flows than somebody up by Lake Erie, but you're also going to tend to end earlier if you get into the non-rainy season earlier, because the nectar flows will turn off and on. So without being down in Jackson, I don't know, but I'm going to guess you're very relatively the same at us. It's just occurring at a different time period. You mentioned clover in your pasture. Unless you're planting something like white Dutch clover, are you doing that?
Yeah, it's a Durana clover, which is a white variety.
Okay.
It's a short clover, and it has
Yeah, so it's white clover.
It's white.
So what I was getting at, as long as it's not red clover, people often see a lot of this red clover that just grows in your pastures, and the honeybees won't work that. Their tongue's not long enough to get down into there. But you're dealing with white clover, so odds are you could potentially carry on a longer nectar flow. But I'll tell you, with clover, from what we notice, if we don't have a good rain every 3 to 4 days, it dries up pretty quick. Now, if you've got rain and you've got a lot of clover and this stuff is producing, absolutely, you would want to keep making honey if that's what you want to do. But I'd caution you, because from our experience, you start delaying mite treatments, it starts building a problem. And we always just say that July 4th is obviously an easy day to remember. And if I ain't got a mite treatment going by July 4th, I better be thinking long and hard about what I'm doing. That's our philosophy. Now, there are some treatments out there that you can put on while you're making honey. So maybe that's an option for you. Did that answer all the questions?
And Greg, don't forget that
Yeah,
even though there might be things blooming, they might
Right.
not be nectar sources for your bees.
Right.
So you're going to have to learn about the plants in your area and when they bloom and find out if they're a pollen source or a nectar source or neither.
So, right. And it's very important that you really read up on this stuff. So we're in Licking County. So let's just call it, we're sitting right on 70 to keep this easy. Okay. I'm going to tell you, it was a beautiful day
Right.
today. Okay. The bees were out. People ought to be able to tell me what they were working. There's a, what's blooming right now, not, but what's getting ready to bud and in process of budding right now.
Maple trees.
You got it. Okay. That's what they would most likely have been on. The willows probably have already gone. If you've got willows around, we don't have a lot of willows, but the maple for right now, for our discussion, is a source right now. But typically it's cold and they're not on top of them, but we've got nice weather now, so they are able to work them. I would encourage you to know a friend or somebody who taps maple trees and is making maple syrup, and have them tell you when that sap is clear, and have them tell you as it starts clouding up and it becomes cloudy and the tapping season is over. And when that point occurs, that maple is done budding. The process is over once that sap turns to that real milky looking color. So that's a good gauge
really?
for you. Yep. It's if it's not all the way done,
Right.
it's very nearing done. Okay. And then obviously we're not far from dandelions coming. You'll start seeing them pop here pretty soon, type of thing. But yeah, that's your nectar.
Okay,
read a lot about Ohio and what's available and when it blooms, and things give nectar certain times of the day. They're all different. They're all different. So, understand that at the same time, even though you see everything pretty blooming, it might not be giving nectar at that time of the day. The bees know. The bees know which ones are.
Chris, this is Teresa Parker. Thank you. This was a great presentation. What kind of queens do you like? Is there a certain breed, or do you just breed your own Ohio queens?
I'll call them mutts.
Okay.
So we're 80% ours, and it really becomes a time thing. It's me for the most part by myself, but we do purchase some. And when I purchase them, I prefer the Carnolian. I just prefer a little darker looking bee. The Carnolian, I think, reacts better to the nectar flows. It's more like a dimmer switch. So she'll kind of move with the ebb and flow of the nectar. You find that a Italian type she's all out. As soon as that nectar turns on, she goes all out laying. And let's say the nectar turns off, she's going to take a little bit to turn off. So her colony populations are often larger on the Italian side. Let's just say throughout the year. Their Carnolian can be every bit as big as an Italian. They can make every bit as honey. It's how you manage them. But we tend to like the Carnolian side if we're not running our mutt.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hey, Chris, this is Rick Miller, and I have a question about when you do the equalizing of the colonies. Now, do you take the bees with them?
No.
You shake them off?
Shake them off. Yep. Okay. I'm equalizing for the brood.
Okay. Are you going to have enough bees to keep that brood warm?
Obviously, if I'm doing that, I'm making sure that that's taken care of. Yeah, we won't overbrood a colony. Absolutely not.
Chris,
Okay,
it's Jeannie. How you talked about measuring with 200 bees. How much is 200 bees? We're told 300 is a half a cup. So what do you use to measure 200?
Well, our alcohol wash, we use Mike Check, and there's 2 lines on there.
I see.
We go by the lines. I'll be honest, I've never like re-dumped it out and measured exactly how many that is.
Okay.
The other thing I didn't touch on, again, it's the other little things we do when we sample these bees, and I take 25% of the bee yard of that sample. So I've got, let's just say we have 4 colonies, right? Or 12 colonies, and I'm going to sample 25%. So I've got the 3, and then after the sample is done, I'm going to dump all those into a single bucket. And then I'm going to take that bucket and I'm going to take out 25% of that bucket. And it's going to go into a Ziploc bag, and that bee yard ID number is going to go on that bag. And what we will often do is we will send that to the bee lab. And we will say, here's what we got. You tell us what you got, and you tell us with all your microscopes and everything else, what else is going on. And it helps us understand the overall health of that colony.
You know, a lot of people say send to the bee lab. What is there a cost when you do that? How do you do that?
Beltsville.
Right.
We send to Beltsville Bee Lab. We call them up. We pay shipping. That's all we pay.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, I've called them, and it's amazing. It's like one of the few places you can call and somebody actually answers the phone and actually talks to you. It's absolutely amazing. And then what they'll do is they'll send you a report. And if you have questions, you can call them. They'll go over the report if you don't understand anything.
Wow. So it's basically a free service then.
For the most part, yeah. I guess if you want to count shipping.
Right, but that's your shipping for the bees.
Right.
Very cool. Good to know.
Hey, Chris. This is Jason England here. I saw your samples of honey, or your jars of honey on that last frame. It looked like you had some buckwheat. Is feeding through the summer the trick to getting a buckwheat harvest? Because I grow 4 or 5 acres of buckwheat every year, and they work the heck out of it, and I get seeds out of the buckwheat, but I don't get much honey.
I mean, with the buckwheat,
is that buckwheat, first of all?
The one on the left is your early spring, and then the middle, and then the one on the right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I can tell you, we don't purposefully plant buckwheat anymore. We did. And it was a fun experience and everything. But what we learned about buckwheat is you better have rain, and it better be a well-drained field. And one of the years we planted it was the first or second year of our lease. And the farmer forgot to tell the fertilizer company, and they came and fertilized that field. And let me tell you, that buckwheat was something else, because it was like the perfect rain and with that fertilizer, and it really produced the nectar. But it's the rain, from what we know and in our experience with it, it's really the rain and fertilizer to really beef that buckwheat up. I don't do it enough to give you specifics on what makes it better versus the other. Now, I can tell you, over the years, we've seen some interesting things with buckwheat. I believe, in my opinion and belief, is it's connected to the amount of rain. But sometimes buckwheat honey will be on the lighter side, and sometimes it'll be as dark as motor oil.
Huh.
So we've seen that. I think it's connected to the irrigation, or how much liquid it's getting, or whatever.
How much are you feeding through summer?
You mean,
and how do you judge that?
So we feed by top feeder. So our top feeders hold 3 gallons. Okay. I judge that by that nectar gauge right there, that nectar dome right there.
Okay.
So I can tell you, when we pull honey and the apivar goes on, I'm going to tell you right now, that top feeder goes on, it's getting 3 gallons. And we're back checking that nectar dome in a week. And if things are holding tight, I might add a little bit, I might not add much, but if that nectar dome is dropping any, they're getting more. We're going to make sure these bees are good and healthy. Obviously, you don't want to overdo it and send them into a swarm mode late in the year. But we watch that nectar dome. It's hard for me to tell you exactly how much to feed a bee colony beyond our feeders hold 3 gallons. Our feeding system is, we pull it on a trailer. It's 2 big giant 350-gallon totes. We pump it. So it's hard for me beyond that to tell you. 3 gallons go in at a time for the most part.
Is that a 1-to-1, Chris?
Yeah. During the summer, absolutely. That's a 1-to-1. And we run Honey Bee Healthy in our feed. And even though we're mixing this at 300 some gallons at a time, I can tell you we follow the manufacturer's label on how much Honey Bee Healthy to put in. It's expensive. Now, it's our choice to use Honey Bee Healthy. There's a couple others out there. I don't have anything bad to say about them. Never used them. Encourage you to use them. I also encourage you, follow the manufacturer's instructions, just like the mite treatments.
If you
Don't
don't,
just put a little dab in there so it smells good and it will encourage the bees. I mean, there's vitamins and nutrients. You're spending that money. Don't throw it away. Spend it wisely. So we mix Honey Bee Healthy in with our feed, 1-to-1, summertime. And if we need to feed in the fall, and again, remember, we're a honey operation. So I'm going to pull honey in the fall. There's a lot of our customer base that likes that dark goldenrod honey. So if I've got to back feed for a little bit there, and we're going to also leave, obviously, nature's natural honey on there, but we might pull a little bit more than we normally want to, but I'm going to back feed with 2-to-1 at that point. So you guys know.
and it's all sugar.
Yeah, sugar. Yep. Dry sugar. And
You don't use any corn.
say again.
You don't use any of the corn
Corn
syrup.
syrup.
No, I don't use that.
Okay.
I've entertained, I mean, we mix a lot of sugar. For my aspects, it's very easy for me to go buy a skid with 50-pound bags on it, open the bag, everything's weighed for me. I know my mixes. We've entertained the idea of having a semi-tanker of corn syrup dropped here. There's a cost for that beyond the syrup. I mean, that tank's sitting on your property, you're paying rental fees and everything else. And in the research I did, there was no research I found that it was so much better than sugar water that it told me, man, I need to move to this direction. I may have heard more cautionary with corn syrup than I expected to hear when we researched it. So from that research and analysis that we did, we've never gone to it. I can't tell you personally from experience how well it works or how well it doesn't.
Now, the Honey Bee Healthy, does that keep the sugar from fermenting?
Yeah, that's one of the things it does. Yep. But it's also got a good vitamin base in it. It's good for their gut.
Do you ever see that set off any robbing?
Say again?
You ever notice any robbing with the Honey Bee Healthy?
Well, again, we're running top feeders. Everything's contained inside the colony. So for the newer individual or the hobby, if you're running a top feeder, I highly suggest on your inner cover, there's normally a hole at the top. That's obviously a ventilation, upper entrance. Bees can get in from the top. If you're running a top feeder, close that hole off. I can tell you from experience, and this is years of experience, spend the money on Gorilla Tape to close that hole off. Don't go buy $2 duct tape at the local dollar store, because between the warm and the cold and the wet and the dry and the bees, they'll peel it off. Gorilla Tape, once you tape that down, the bees aren't going to remove it and the cold's not going to affect it. So if you're feeding and the heat's not going to affect it, if you're feeding, that keeps anything from coming in the top. And then In the summertime, we close our entrances back pretty far. I mean, we're running about a three-inch entrance through summer, 3 to 4, let's say. I mean, we're not running a wide open entrance in the summer. All our colonies are solid bottoms. So that just kind of gives you an idea. So that might help your robbing a bit if you've got that. But if you're getting robbed and you're top feeding, I'd begin to guess you got that top entrance wide open.
What are you doing for ventilation in the summer then?
Ventilation in the summer runs through the vents on our boxes. So we don't run a traditional wooden box. We run insulated foam boxes. There's a lot of argument either way on that. I can just tell you with our luck and what we do and our experience and what we've seen, we really like the insulated boxes. I can tell you we run off of by Superior B, and those lids are vented.
Good.
Or maybe I should say we vented them. Yeah, that's
a little
more
different.
Yep. And I can tell you, I've bought a lot of boxes and equipment from him up there, and he has really worked close with us and really taken our observations and some of the things we have done to alter his equipment to our liking. I can tell you, he has changed his molds and he's got vents going in through boxes now, and I believe he's trying to put the vent on the migratory lid. But that's what we do in the summertime. But we're running a solid bottom. That entrance is, let's say, 3 to 4 inches wide open, and there's that little vent hole in the top. And yes, we have big, giant Santa Claus beards coming off those colonies in summertime, and it doesn't bother me one bit. The bees will take care of themselves. That's how they're cool and everything.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Hey, Chris, I'd like to roll back to the reversal that you were talking about. Will you reverse if you're going to split the brood nest, or will you not?
I won't. So so let's get back to the medium or the 4 to 7 frames is the tough ones to deal with. Okay. I'm targeting 5 to 6 frames of brood. So let's play this out. Let's say I open it up and I've got a nice 7 frame colony, and let's just keep this easy. Let's say it has 7 frames of brood in it. Okay. I'm going to take 1 frame of brood, shake the bees. That's going to the colony next door that just happens to be a frame short. So it's going in there. I've now accounted for that frame of brood. And now this colony, I'm going to reverse. So those frames of brood, because remember, I'm doing this right there after Easter, right before the end of April. So the bees are still up top. Remember, I haven't busted any boxes apart yet at this point. It's right in that, you know, from the first week of April, let's say the Easter week, till the end of April. That's when all this is going to occur. So the bees are normally up in that top box. So in this picture, I've got my 7 frames of brood in box A. I'm going to strip a frame out. I'm going to give it to the colony next door that needs equalized. And then I simply take those 6 frames of brood I have left and reverse those boxes. And box B goes on top and the brood in box A goes on the bottom. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It does, yep.
Yeah. Chris, can you remind, I know you've talked about this to us before. You talked about pushing the bees down and compacting them. Remind us how many boxes you run through the winter. Or is it just the 2?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, again, I'm trying to manage this the best I can. I'm going to target everything I do to end up into a double deep. Okay. Mm-hmm. My goal is to have a jam-packed double deep with an entire top deep full of honey. And if I can do that, and I have healthy bees, I'm going to come right through winter I'm going to be okay. There's going to be no emergency feeding. It's more of a protein patty event through the spring to help build them up. And that's what I'm going to target. Am I successful at that? Not always. So if I have any exceptions to that, I am going to get those bees into the smallest possible box I can. I'm going to tell you, we've got, I'll call them nukes, but the insulated equipment we run are 6-frame, and I sent those into winter with 3 frames of bees, and those things are, you know, we're almost through this assessment process. Those things are going to go right into a 10-frame box without batting an eye. So I'm going to say we're highly successful at overwintering a 4 to 5 frame nuke. And again, we've got it surrounded with honey, obviously. Yep. And I'm surprised nobody's asked our overwinter rate. I can tell you this year we're at 4.4% loss.
Wow. That's
So,
awesome.
and
Now,
we're pushing about 250 colonies. So that gives you an idea of how many we lost. And it hurts at our level. When you start getting to that, it hurts the pocketbook. I'm not lying. So that's why it's so important when we do this assessment. We spend so much time with logging and understanding during the cold months and having the plan so we make sure our money is being spent wisely. So that's why we do that. We take that time to do that.
Are your overwintered nukes double deep or not?
Some of them are single, some of them are double. It just depends at the time when we put everything together. We don't have a lot of extra time in the fall, but I can tell you, if I have, let's say I have a jam-packed 10-frame single deep, if I have the boxes on the truck and we've got time, I will transfer that to a double nuke. Okay, I find that the bees move vertical a lot better than they move horizontal.
Yeah.
So if I've got the availability on the truck and we've got time, I'm going to do that. Kids don't enjoy all that, but they're coming around because they know coming out of winter, that thing's going right into back into a 10-frame deep with another drawn comb on top, and we're rocking and rolling. So it's extra work. I'm not going to lie, but my overwinter rate, it seems to do better. They move vertical better.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, on the this time of year, you're talking about dead outs. Do you have any advice for what to do with
that didn't work well.
What you do with the resources out of a dead out?
So out of a dead out, obviously you have, let's say, drawn comb. Now, with our drawn comb, that's on a cycle. So we're watching that drawn comb. We try to cycle that out about every 3 years, I'd say at the most. But we're really watching that comb. If it's getting nasty and black and real heavy, we try to get it out of those colonies. And I can tell you, I mean, we burn it. I mean, you throw it in a burn pile, it's done its time. That's why it's also critical to always draw frames when you can draw frames. So that's what we do with the drawn comb. Obviously, if it's good comb, we keep the drawn comb. The honey that's on there from a dead out, there's nothing wrong with it. We just use that for feed going into another colony, or if we're making a split, there's your honey for your split. What specific question do you have?
Well, I was, there's dead bees and you have.
Okay, so, and this is kind of funny, but, so you have a dead out and you got this cluster in there, and obviously you tear the box apart, we scrape everything, and we torch some of the stuff. Now that we move to the insulated side, we've obviously we don't torch the inside of those boxes. They won't tolerate that. But there is still some stuff in wood out there. Now we'll take a big blowtorch and just kind of char it a little bit to make sure everything's good there. But with the foam ones, they're very slick on the inside. So we'll scrape everything off, and then normally I just have soapy water like your dish detergent. Just give it a wipe down just to make sure it's what I can do with the equipment I'm running. That's what I do with it. So the pile of bees, it's on the ground. They're on the ground, and then what you'll often see is the bees down in the cell. Well, that's when they were clustered up. Okay. I might give that frame a tap and try to knock a few out, but I caution that because sometimes, or most of the time, you're going to destroy the drawn comb more than you're going to do good. I can tell you the bees are going to when you put that back into a colony, the bees are going to clean that out better than you and I will.
An air compressor can do it.
Yeah, an air compressor will do it. Again, just be careful that you're not damaging the comb. Now they'll fix them, but if you blast it and blow a big giant hole in it, well, but that's what we do with this stuff.
All righty.
What other questions? Are there any more?
Phew, a lot of information, Chris. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I got about 8 pages here.
You know, I hope it helps, but that's what we do. Just keep in the back of your mind, you know, there are different techniques out there. There's nothing wrong with them. We are a honey operation, so remember, we're gearing these bees to make us honey. So it's totally different if you're in a queen operation or you're selling nukes and everything else, because you're not concerned about stopping the swarm. That's what we are trying to focus on.
Right.
So what's your primary market for your honey? I mean, that's a lot of honey, right?
Yeah. So we move almost 8 tons of it a year.
Wow.
So the primary market, I'm going to say it's split 50-50. So 50% of it is obviously we're at our local farmers markets, and we stock almost all of our local feed mills and those type of stores. Obviously, we don't put it in something like Kroger. And the other 50% of it goes to, I'll call it the commercial side, but it's really not the commercial side. So you get a lot of these local breweries. There's a lot of mead making going on. A lot of local beer companies. These local breweries use honey. You've got baking stores or bakeries that use it. And then we also sell quite a bit of it into the medical side of the industry.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. From the medical side, they take it and that's where they infuse it. And what we understand is, y'all are familiar with CBD?
Yep.
Yep. There's a big medical market on that right now.
Yep.
So that's where a good bit of it goes from that standpoint. So it's about 50-50 from your local to your commercial.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Do we have more questions for Chris tonight? Well, we sure do appreciate your talking with us.
Absolutely.
People ask to have you back a lot, so we did.
Well, you know,
So.
I appreciate it. I hope I can help people. I'm sure there's things I say that will be disputed. That's fine. You know, to each his own.
Yep.
I encourage you to try things, you know, and don't give up type of thing.
Yeah.
And talk to a lot of people, get a lot of opinions.
Well, and that's, you know, we're encouraging. We kind of got slammed last year with the COVID thing, you know, right as new beekeepers had just finished their training or somewhere in the middle of it. And I think they felt really let down that, you know, we weren't able to help them personally. But now that we've kind of all learned this Zoom thing and gotten a little used to it, you know, hopefully this year's group will be a little more comfortable doing it that way. So.
Well, good.
It's hard, but we're trying.
Yeah. Now you guys still keep a bee yard? Are you still allowed to do that?
We do. We lost our bees last year. We need to develop a cadre of really dedicated folks for our bee yard. But the church where we meet, when we can meet, the pastor there has been a beekeeper for 40 years.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, so we were allowed to have it, and we actually have had a guy build us a shed on the property for our stuff. So we have, that availability now to store things and for people to come to do inspections and be able to get into that building and get the things they need and things like that. So hopefully this year we can kind of get really organized and use it for teaching.
Good.
I had another question. How many hives do you typically put in a yard? I know there's a point of vanishing returns at adding more hives in a certain area.
So we try to target anywhere from about 15. We're running right around 15 a bee yard.
Okay.
Okay. And then I'm going to spread those bee yards out about 5 or 7 miles.
Okay.
So the caution with putting so many bees in one location you got to worry about is over browsing.
So, yeah, eventually you get diminishing returns per hive, right?
Exactly. And, obviously we're on the larger side, and there's a lot of people around that have 1 or 2 hives. And as you're driving around, observe that. Not that 1 or 2 hives is really going to make a giant difference in the over browsing, but you're really looking for, like, somebody like us that's got 20 some hives on a property and you've got 20 hives next door, you're going to start getting into it's just a tough situation, I guess, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
well, that's good to know. I'm planning on having 10 or 12 here this year. At least I know I'm not overstocking yet.
Oh, no. I think you'll be plenty fine. Yeah.
Good. Anybody else? Last chance. Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming, and
absolutely.
We really appreciate it, and I'll get it posted for a bit to let some of the people that could make it tonight. I know one of our guys is watching from work. I don't know whether he is able to stay on for the whole time or not, but is Robert still on? But they're trying. So, well, good. Does anybody else have any last words for the good of the cause here, or we about? Our brain is full.
Yep.
Thank you. I learned a lot.
I did too. I've got about 8 pages of notes here, I think. Thanks a bunch, Chris. We really appreciate it. So, and glad that so many of our new people came tonight. I'm really glad to see that. Thank you. I mean, you'll really benefit, from making the effort, and it's not much of an effort when you can sit on your couch in your jammies and do it. So, it's
just my head.
Yes,
my head
you're right.
Exactly.
Did you get your bees in, Amber? Or your hives at least
moved? Yeah, they're
Good
there.
deal.
I'm going to go there tomorrow and just kind of peek and see what's going on and then feed like you had mentioned.
Yeah. Well, Amber bought one of our new beekeepers from last year that decided it was just too much and she was going to get out, wanted to sell her stuff, had it inspected by Barb Blesher, and one of our new beekeepers from this year bought her stuff. So, starting out with a hive full of drawn comb, if nothing else. There are some bees. We're just not sure they got a queen. So.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to check tomorrow and see. And
yep.
Yeah, that was fun moving that at 10 o'clock at night. But
yeah, I'm sure it was cool. Much more fun doing it at 10 o'clock at night than if you had done it at noon. Trust us.
It's interesting when there's a hole in the hive and you go to move them at night. They tend to crawl right out and they're not happy.
Yeah.
not that I know that from experience, but
guess you better go get some of that Gorilla Tape, Jason.
Yeah. And that's what I used too, was Gorilla Tape. So that's funny that you mentioned that, because I was like, that's exactly what I used to tape that hive together.
Holler at her.
Yep.
Yeah, get a hold of the boss lady.
Yep.
When she wants it.
Yeah.
She wants
Thank you again. I appreciate it.
All righty.
That's what it said on my sheet. 27 there.
Chris, are you going to have some nukes for sale this year, or packages?
We've got packages still. I can tell you we're sold out of nukes.
Okay.
So now we're sold out of the early side of the nukes, the overwintered one.
Right.
potentially there could be some later summer splits as we start getting through all this.
Okay.
But we've got plenty of packages.
Okay.
Ours come from California, so we get them
Okay.
off of Conan. So if anybody wants to research or know, that's where we're getting them from. So, and they're going at 138.
Okay.
So, yep, they sell well. We've had a lot of luck with them. So
Good. Good.
things
Well, that's
are going
good.
well there.
Good for anybody that's still looking there.
How
And
much?
he's B Barons in Newark.
Okay. How much did you sell your nukes for?
This year,
Yeah.
170.
170.
Okay. All righty. Good to know.
Yep.
All righty. Anybody else got anything to let us know about? All righty. Well, it's great to see everybody tonight. Thank you, Chris. Thanks everybody for coming.
Absolutely.
Read through your notes and think about it and ready to get going on these bees. So hopefully we'll have a good year. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Hey, all righty. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Yep.